අලුතෙන් SLT Mobitel Home 4G LTE connection ගන්නායට වටිනා tab computers සහ data දීමනා. අලුතෙන් SLT Mobitel Home 4G LTE connection ගන්නායට වටිනා tab computers සහ data දීමනා.
පැස් සබන් බිලිඳ සම්ට විශේෂයෙන්ම නිෂ්පාදිතයි. SLS ප්‍රමිති සහතිකය සහිතයි.
Tonight, free to float. The International Monetary Fund urges Sri Lanka to float the rupee and help ease its woes. Why should we? The question of underperforming state-operated enterprises gets an emphatic answer.
Why should the state fund dead corporation?
Switching around, the President decides on an emergency cabinet reshuffle with dissident cabinet ministers out. Clipping their wings. Russia government spokesman says special operation only to destroy Ukraine's military capability. All that and much more coming up on First at 9. This Thursday, the 3rd of March, 2022.
සියයක් දක්වා ඉස්සොරි නැති සියක් සුසිනිඳු කෙස් කලමක් ලබා දේ. Dove Anti-Dandruff.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening, welcome to First at 9. I'm Thamik Eknai. Now, the International Monetary Fund says there is an urgent need to implement credible strategies to restore Sri Lanka's macroeconomic stability and reduce its burgeoning debt. A statement issued by the IMF at the conclusion of the Article 4 consultations has offered a list of recommendations to put it back on a path of economic sustainability, including, not surprisingly, a U-turn on the central bank's pegged dollar exchange rate policy. In addition, noting Sri Lanka's low tax-to-GDP ratio, the IMF says that there is scope for raising income taxes, VAT rates and minimising exemptions, complemented with revenue administration reform.
Officials of the International Monetary Fund were in Sri Lanka between the 7th and 20th of December last year for Article 4 consultations. In Article 4 consultations, a team of IMF economists visit a country to assess its economic and financial developments and discuss the country's economic and financial policies with the government and central bank officials. At the conclusion of the consultations, an official statement was released yesterday, offering its assessment of the island's current economic situation and offering a list of recommendations for a quick turnaround. At the outset, the IMF warns that Sri Lanka's economic outlook remains constrained by its large debt overhang, as well as persistently large fiscal and balance of payments financing needs. It adds that GDP growth is projected to be negatively affected by the impact of the dollar shortage, as well as macroeconomic imbalances on economic activities and business confidence. Further inflation, it warns, could remain in the double-digit range in the coming quarters too. It also predicts that Sri Lanka's fiscal deficit will remain large over 2022 to 2026, raising public debt over the medium term if current government policies to preserve tax cuts continue. Further, due to persistent external debt service burdens, it says that international reserves will also remain inadequate despite ongoing efforts to secure forex financing from external sources. The IMF has also stressed the urgency of implementing a credible and coherent strategy to restore macroeconomic stability and debt sustainability while protecting vulnerable groups and reducing poverty through strengthened, well-targeted social safety nets. Chief among its list of recommendations to the Sri Lankan government is a rethink of its pegged US dollar exchange rate to be replaced with a market-determined flexible rate that could facilitate external adjustments and help build reserves. The IMF also urges authorities to gradually unwind capital flow management measures as conditions permit. In addition, they also took note of Sri Lanka's low tax-to-GDP ratio, where they see scope for raising income tax and VAT rates and minimizing exemptions, complemented with revenue administration reform. The IMF has also encouraged continued improvements to expenditure rationalization, budget formulation and execution, and fiscal rule. They also encourage the authorities to reform state-owned enterprises and adopt cost recovery energy pricing as well.
Now then, at the heels of the International Monetary Fund's Article 4 consultations, economist Dr. Tissa Jayavira accepts that recommendations made in the IMF report to be spot on. Speaking to Indira Yamwatha on our current affairs program at Hyde Park on AdaDerana 24, Dr. Jayavira called for the rupee to be floated, while also criticising Sri Lanka's practice of selling fuel below the cost.
The IMF called Sri Lanka to adopt a cost recovery energy pricing. What does this mean? Can Sri Lanka look into these suggestions by the IMF in a more productive way?
Their submission is correct, but our politicization of the economy is not accepting what they say. Now, for example, I first went to USA in 1976. Fuel was 92 cents a gallon. Now it's about $5 a gallon. We are the only country that is selling fuel below the cost. So how can a country develop? We are always in a panic, right? The government is also put into a panic. People are also put into a panic. There is surplus growth of vegetables now, but what was being said, without fertilizers, vegetables can't grow. So we are still not walking, we are only talking.
You talk about the need for a focus on making loss-making state-owned enterprises profitable or at least break even. The IMF also calls for reforms, but it looks like this is a failed project altogether because we continue to talk about reviving state-owned enterprises. Or should we term this different? Or should there be a different approach?
I agree with you. There should be a different approach. Now this approach was started in 1989 during President Premadasa's time, and then at the end of it, the state enterprises were picked. Some were bad, some were profitable, so they were listed in the stock market. And the employees were made shareholders. 10% of the shares were given to employees. The ownership, of course, has changed, but none of them are running at a loss. They're all profitable and they have become great companies. These are all public money. We have 22 million people supporting 1.4 million state employees plus state corporations. There is about another million being employed in state corporations which are being funded by the state. Why should the state fund dead corporations? Now see, England has privatized almost all their state organizations. London Transport, excellent.
Are you saying that privatization is the way forward for us?
I will say that is peopleization that is way forward.
What does that mean?
That means people must become shareholders of these companies. The managers of the companies, not the general manager and people like that, but the directors of the companies should be all experienced people who know how to run an organization. Now you take most of the state corporations, none of those people know how to run an organization. A good example is Sri Lankan Airlines. We were state run at a loss. We gave it over to another company to manage. They managed at a profit over a conflict. Just overnight it was taken over. Within 12 months it was worse than what it was. Now I worked in China. China is also trying to solve their employment by employing more people. So the same thing is happening here. Employing more people doesn't solve the employment problem. You need productivity. So there is no measure of productivity in this country. You take the output or the revenue, divide by the number of employees, you will find that they hardly contribute. When they were developing Japan, one person had to contribute 11 times his salary for them to recover. In this country, other way around. Government is paying them for no recovery.
Foreign reserves have plunged 70% since 2020, and this has slumped to $2.36 billion by end January. We've been talking about difficulty to manage the purchase of much needed fuel.
Our expatriate labor transfer of money has gone down by 20-30%. Not they are transferring less, they are sending by third party means to their relatives. They are going to the black market and changing, so the government does not get the money. Let the dollar float, then the country will develop. So those are things that people or our economists have to think of. They are still, running on that line. They are not going up and down the line, adjusting themselves to meet the economic trend. And we are happy that some of the state banks are advertising we are giving 10 rupees more. Who they bothered about the 10 rupees more when you can get 30 rupees more?
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa announced an emergency cabinet reshuffle today following a meeting with his ministers. Several portfolios were changed, while 2 new cabinet ministers are expected to be named. Losing out in the reshuffle are ministers Vimal Weerawansa and Uday Gammanpila.
At a meeting between President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and several government ministers at the Presidential Secretariat today, the head of state has decided to reshuffle the current cabinet. The changes in cabinet ministerial portfolios were announced a short while ago, with the portfolios of several cabinet ministers having been changed. According to the President's Media Division release, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has changed the ministerial portfolios of several cabinet ministers, while 2 new cabinet ministers were appointed. Minister of Power Gamini Lokuge has been appointed as the Minister of Energy, while former Transport Minister Pavitra Vaniyarachi has been appointed the new Power Minister. Further, State Minister Dilum Amnugama has been slated to be appointed as the new Minister of Transport as well. Meanwhile, it was also confirmed that SLPP MP SP Desanayaka has been sworn in as the Minister of Industries. In the meantime, the President's Media Division also confirmed that former Ministers Vimal Veeravansa and Udayagaman Pilla have been removed from the Cabinet ministerial posts.
The schedule for rolling interruptions to the power supply tomorrow has been announced by the Ceylon Electricity Board. The new schedule remains the same as the power shedding timetable announced for yesterday as well as today. With that, daytime power cuts will be imposed between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. and between 6 p.m. and 11 p.m. at night. Daytime power cuts will be experienced from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. tomorrow for areas falling under groups E, T, U, V and W. The nighttime power cuts for these areas will be from 6 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Meanwhile, areas coming under groups F, P, Q, R and S will experience daytime power interruptions from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. The electricity supply will again be disrupted from 8:30 p.m. to 11 p.m. in these areas. Russia's ambassador in Sri Lanka, Yuri Materi, pledged his government's fullest support for Sri Lanka at the United Nations Human Rights Council at an event held in Colombo yesterday. The event was held to mark 65 years of diplomatic ties between the two countries. Meanwhile, the Foreign Ministry announced that it has taken steps to ensure the safe evacuation of 49 Sri Lankans from Ukraine so far, with more heading towards the Polish border at present.
Sri Lanka and the Russian Federation marked a significant milestone in diplomatic ties on the 19th of last month. With that, an event was held at the Russian Centre in Colombo to celebrate 65 years of bilateral ties yesterday. Also present at the event was a delegation from the Russian Federation. Speaking at the event was the Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the Russian Federation to Sri Lanka, Yuri Materi. In his address, Ambassador Materi paid tribute to the strength of diplomatic ties between the two nations and the similar approaches shared by the countries towards important foreign policy issues. He also appreciated Sri Lanka's support to Russia at the United Nations General Assembly during what he termed important resolutions. In return, the ambassador expressed his government's commitment to standing with Sri Lanka at the United Nations Human Rights Council as well. He also noted the strong trade ties between the two countries as well, namely in the tourism sector and as one of Sri Lanka's largest tea export markets. Also speaking at the event, State Minister for Regional Cooperation Taraka Balasuriya appreciated Russia's support for Sri Lanka at international forums, which he said was through actions and not merely words. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has offered an update on the repatriation of Sri Lankan nationals from Ukraine. In a notice posted on the ministry website, it stated that 17 Sri Lankans had departed from Ukraine prior to the commencement of hostilities, and since then a further 32 Sri Lankans had evacuated the country to Poland. The ministry also stated that there are more Sri Lankan nationals in Ukraine who are currently proceeding to the Polish border for return via Poland. In the meantime, the Foreign Ministry says that it is also liaising with the Sri Lankan embassy in Moscow to facilitate the temporary voluntary return of Sri Lankan students from the Gomel State Medical University and Grodno State Medical University in Belarus.
We will see you shortly on the other side of this break. Stay with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. You're watching First at 9. Now, the Federation of Health Professionals said that the token strike launched by 17 health sector trade unions will be called off tomorrow at 8 a.m. for a period of 10 days. Meanwhile, addressing the demands of the trade unions, Health Minister Kehelia Rambukwella said that he is ready to explain to the country how unfair or fair their demands are. Yesterday, a total of 17 health sector trade unions affiliated with nursing, supplementary and paramedical services launched a token strike calling on the Health Ministry to fulfill the promises made during the last strike action in February. Though the striking trade unions said that they received a favourable response from the Health Secretary during the talks held last evening, the strike entered its second day today, inconveniencing the public at hospitals. However, this evening, the Federation of Health Professionals announced that their strike action will be called off temporarily tomorrow at 8 a.m. for a period of 10 days. What they highlight as the reason for the temporary halt is the favourable response of the Health Secretary given to them last evening and the ongoing fuel and power crisis in the country that has inconvenienced the general public. However, the health minister is less than impressed with the trade union's demands and held a media briefing on the matter.
මේ ඉල්ලීම් වල තියෙන සාධාරණත්වය අසාධාරණත්වය ඉදිරියේදී ඒ අවශ්‍ය වෙලාවට මම රටට පෙන්වන්න සූදානම්. සමහරක් විට මේ රටේ පුරවැසියන් නොදන්න කරුණු ගණනාවක් තිබෙනවා. වේතනයන් සම්බන්ධව විශේෂ දීමනාවන් සම්බන්ධව අවසානයේ තමා ගෙදර ගෙනියන වැටුප සම්බන්ධව එතකොට ජනතාව තීන්දුව කරයි කාටද සාධාරණ වෙලා තියෙන්නේ කාටද අසාධාරණ වෙලා තියෙන්නේ.
High Commissioner of Pakistan to Sri Lanka, Major General Umar Farooq Burki says that his country will help Sri Lanka in any way it can. Addressing an event today, he also said that Pakistan may have smaller pockets, but its heart is big.
Cricket equipment for schools in the area of Berwala in the Karutara district was donated by the High Commissioner of Pakistan in Sri Lanka this morning under the patronage of Pakistan's High Commissioner, Major General Umar Farooq Burki and Minister of Youth and Sports Namal Rajapaksa. The donation was made following a request by the Deputy Foreign Minister of the Sri Lankan Youth Parliament, who is also a resident of Berwala.
The Youth Parliament system is a very vibrant system that we have created in our country, where the younger generation get involved in administration, where they come up with their own policies for the Youth Parliament, and also we believe integrating that with the existing system. That will not only give them the exposure of administration, but also give them the opportunity to work with relevant government organizations and then also to get first-hand experience in governing the country. So Pakistan and Sri Lanka has been very strong friends, I would say, for many years, especially with the Prime Minister Imran Khan. We will be organizing a World Youth Conference through our Youth Parliament towards the end of this year. So we would like to see a delegation from Pakistan coming and exchanging the ideas as how the future, not only the region but the world, can be.
We continue to go an extra mile always whenever we get an opportunity to help, especially the youth, because the youth is the one which is going to make the difference for the future of any country. The more you concentrate on the youth, the better this world will be, the better this country will be, the better the environment will be. At the same time, I also request that please continue forwarding us your request for anything that we can do in our humble capacity. Our kitty or our pocket might be small, but our hearts are big. So wherever we can, we will definitely continue supporting and helping for the betterment of the two countries, for the cooperation of the two countries.
Welcome back. This is First at 9. Now, European experts call on Sri Lankan businesses planning to export organic produce to the European Union to ensure that their standards are being adhered to, though they are rather strict. During a recent webinar to promote sustainable trade and investment between Sri Lanka and the Netherlands, the need for a proper traceability system and obtaining of EU certification for the products were also highlighted. Despite certain challenges, Sri Lanka is in the process of attempting to go fully green with its agriculture. The view of experts is that Sri Lanka, being an island and its location in the equator, makes it easier for the country to shift from chemical to chemical-free. It has a number of plus points, such as health benefits brought on by lack of use of chemical fertilizer and commercial benefits it brings in turn. Over the past years, the world has seen a greater pivot, especially in Europe, towards organic foods, and the foreign exchange organic exports could bring to the country is vast. In other words, the world is crying out for fully organic produce, and Sri Lanka could walk into that market. The government's green push has not gone unnoticed, with the likes of the United Nations and the European Union praising the move and offering support. But organic exports to the EU is a bit more complicated and must tick many boxes to meet their required standards. During a recent webinar to promote sustainable trade and investment promotion between Sri Lanka and the Netherlands, this element was discussed.
If you look at the European market, the first market is Germany, then you have basically France, and then the Netherlands, and then Switzerland, and then Scandinavia. The thing they have in common is that they are all looking at very high quality products, and that you need to have, well, your organic integrity and your organic traceability. So a very typical aspect of being able to supply organic products to the market is that you need to know from which fields the product is really coming. So you need to have a proper traceability system in place, usually a software package. And next to that, you have to be certified according to the EU regulation for organic products. So there is an EU standard, which is very detailed on both quality, but also that it should not contain pesticide residues, for example. But also the normal food law is in application. And I would look at the European market, especially the European market, as a premium market. So in general, there are good prices available for organic products, but you need to relatively high quality standards that people also expect for organic products. If you look at the imports in Europe, then the market in Germany, for example, is the biggest, but all the imports go around 1/3 of all the imports in the European Union go through the Netherlands, so through the Dutch quality system and also the Dutch organic authority that's called SCAL, and they are responsible for the quality control of the products that are all coming in.
Benchmark Brent crude oil prices climbed close to $120 a barrel today, with Russian oil exports disrupted as traders try to avoid becoming entangled in sanctions. Support also came from US crude stockpiles at multi-year lows, helping to lift the Brent crude futures as high as $119.84 a barrel, for the highest level since 2012. By afternoon, the contract was up $4 or 3.6% at $116.97 a barrel. Brent has jumped by about 37% in the past 30 days, and the contract's 6-month spread hit a record high today at more than $21 a barrel, indicating very tight supplies. US West Texas Intermediate crude hit a high of $116.57, its loftiest since 2008, before retreating a little to $114.34, up $3.74 or 3.38%. The gains followed a fresh round of US sanctions that target Russia's oil refining sector, raising concerns that Russian oil and gas exports could be targeted next. Meanwhile, at the Colombo Bourse, Sri Lankan stocks fell more than 2% today, weighed down by losses in industrial and financial stocks. The all-share price index fell by 243.68 points to end at 11,162.66. The S&P SL20 index of more liquid stocks, meanwhile, ended at 3,765 after losing 95.25 points. The share volume stood at 73,043,938, while the market turnover was 2 billion rupees. In the meantime, the rupee remains unchanged at 202.99 cents against the US dollar. Now let's take a look at how the Sri Lankan rupee fared against other major currencies during the day. Russia's government spokesperson Dmitry Peskov says that his country's military operation against Ukraine is only aimed at destroying Ukraine's military capabilities and not to introduce martial law. Meanwhile, Russia's foreign ministry announced on social media a short while ago that the second round of ceasefire between the two countries are underway. The Russian ministry added that it hopes to bring about an end to the situation, restore peace in Donbass, and enable all people in Ukraine to return to peaceful life.
The Kremlin today praised Russian troops fighting in Ukraine as heroes who would go down in history and described the deaths of soldiers there as a tragedy. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov also said President Vladimir Putin would convene Russia's Security Council later today, but did not say what the group of top state officials and heads of defense and security agencies would discuss. In a briefing with reporters, Peskov dismissed speculation that Russian authorities plan to introduce martial law following its invasion of Ukraine, or that they will prevent men leaving Russia. Russia calls its actions in Ukraine a special operation that it says is not designed to occupy territory, but to destroy its southern neighbor's military capabilities and capture what it regards as dangerous nationalists Peskov said Russian casualties in the fighting in Ukraine, which the Defense Ministry put at 498 soldiers in a statement on Wednesday, were a source of grief. In the meantime, a British shipment of humanitarian aid flew to Ukraine today from an airport north of London. The consignment was provided by the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Earlier in the week, local media reported Britain had sent medical aid shipments to Ukraine, and Health Minister Sajid Javid said there would be many more flights. Meanwhile, 1 million people have fled Ukraine in a week after Russia invaded the country, the head of the United Nations Refugee Agency said in a video address released today. In just 7 days, 1 million people have fled Ukraine, uprooted by this senseless war, UNHCR head Filippo Grandi said. He added that after working in refugee emergencies for almost 40 years, rarely has he seen an exodus as rapid as this one. Russia's invasion of Ukraine entered its second week today as apparent tactical failure so far, with its main assault force stalled for days on the highway north of Kiev and other advances halted at the outskirts of cities it is bombing into wasteland. A growing tide of Ukrainian refugees fleeing the brutal invasion streamed into Central Europe as volunteers and officials accelerated efforts to process arrivals. With Russian forces intent on advancing towards Kiev and bombing some other Ukrainian cities into wastelands, the UN Refugee Agency also said the conflict looks set to trigger Europe's largest refugee crisis this century.
Russian and Belarusian athletes were barred from the Winter Paralympics in Beijing today on the eve of the Games, following threats of boycotts by other teams over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Belarus has been a key staging area for the invasion, which was launched a week ago. The International Paralympic Committee's decision comes after a day after it gave the athletes from the two countries the green light to participate as neutrals, saying that the governing body had followed its rules and that athletes were not the aggressors. IPC President Andrew Parsons told a news conference in Beijing that the body's decision led to an outcry and threats from other countries' national Paralympic committees to boycott the Games. And that's it from all of us here at First at 9. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.